Pause for a moment, really pause. If you are scrolling right now, stop. If you have multiple tabs open, close most of them. What I am about to explain is not a distant possibility or a future warning. It already happened quietly while most people were asleep. By the time headlines start talking about it, the consequences will already be locked in and irreversible. In the very early hours of the morning, Switzerland did not issue a warning or hint at a policy change. There was no debate, no press conference, no gradual transition. They pulled the brake without hesitation. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, Swiss time, the export of silver was frozen. Not slowed, not taxed, not restricted, frozen completely. This decision did not come from speculation or market panic. It came from authority. At that exact hour, a directive was triggered that stopped large-scale silver shipments from leaving the country. No exceptions, no grace period, no quiet workaround. The system simply stopped. At the center of this story are 3 refineries that most people have never heard of, but almost everyone depends on. PAMP, Valcambi, Argor Heraeus. If you have ever held a serious silver bar, there is a very high chance one of those names was stamped on it. Together, these facilities process the majority of the world's refined silver. That is not influence. That is control. And in one moment, all 3 received the same instruction from Swiss authorities. Any shipment above 1,000 kilograms would now require special export approval, with a review period lasting between 14 and 21 business days. Until that process is completed, nothing leaves Switzerland. If that sounded technical or boring, let me translate it into plain language. Every large commercial shipment of physical silver is now stuck. Anything already sitting in customs is frozen. Anything scheduled to ship is delayed for weeks. This is not about paperwork moving slowly. This is about metal hitting a wall. Silver does not move in small packages. Dealers and industrial buyers do not order a few coins at a time. These shipments involve tens or hundreds of thousands of ounces. Entire production cycles depend on them arriving on schedule. Overnight, that schedule was erased. And here is the part most people completely miss. This has nothing to do with charts, futures contracts, or numbers flashing on trading screens. This is not about paper silver. This is about physical metal. The heavy, real kind that gets turned into solar panels, electronics, medical equipment, and yes, coins and bars people actually hold in their hands. That physical supply just got cut at the source. Switzerland is not just another stop in the silver supply chain. Switzerland is the hub. For more than a century, it has been the refining center for precious metals worldwide. Mining happens everywhere. Refining does not. Raw silver comes out of the ground, mixed with other materials. It is inconsistent and unusable at scale, until it is refined to the standard everyone demands. 4 nines purity. The Swiss perfected that process, automated it, and scaled it. The entire global system is built around that capability. To understand the impact of this decision, you need to understand how the silver system actually works. Mining and refining are not the same thing. Silver is extracted all over the world, but what comes out of the ground is raw, inconsistent, and unusable at industrial scale. Before it can power electronics, medical devices, solar panels, or be sold as investment-grade metal, it must be refined to 4 nines purity. That refinement process is highly specialized, capital-intensive, and concentrated in very few places on Earth. For more than a century, Switzerland positioned itself as the neutral, trusted center of that process. Raw silver flows in from countries like Peru, Mexico, Australia, and until recently, China. Swiss refineries purify it, cast it into standardized bars, certify it with globally accepted hallmarks, and then ship it back out to mints, dealers, and industrial buyers across every continent. Remove Switzerland from that loop, and the system does not slow down. It stops. This is why the export freeze matters immediately, even if prices have not reacted yet. The United States Mint relies on Swiss refined silver. European bullion dealers rely on it. Asian buyers rely on Swiss kilobars for large-scale transactions. The assumption baked into the global market is that Swiss silver is always available. When that assumption breaks, contracts do not magically adjust. Production schedules break first. The Swiss customs notice was not ambiguous or symbolic. It cited emergency economic provisions and explicitly overrode existing export licenses. That language matters. Governments do not invoke emergency authority in the middle of the night unless they believe a strategic threshold has already been crossed. This was not a preemptive warning. It was a response to a situation that Swiss authorities already considered unstable. So the real question is not whether this will ripple through the market. It is why Switzerland chose this moment to act, knowing full well it would disrupt global supply chains. The answer is not speculation or politics. It is that multiple supply pressures converged at once, and Switzerland decided that preserving domestic stability was more important than continuing to serve as the world im dues supplier of last resort. The first pressure point appeared quietly at the beginning of the year when China imposed restrictions on refined silver exports. China produces hundreds of millions of ounces annually, and a meaningful share of that output previously flowed into global supply chains. A significant portion did not go directly to end users. It went to Switzerland, not because Chinese silver lacked purity, but because Western markets demand standardized bar sizes, certifications, and globally trusted stamps that Swiss refineries provide. When China closed that channel, Switzerland instantly lost a major source of refined input metal. Under normal conditions, that loss would have been manageable. Inventories would cushion the shock, and production could adjust over time. But conditions were not normal. Demand over the previous months had been relentless. Industrial users, investment funds, and retail buyers were all pulling metal as fast as refineries could produce it. Output was leaving vaults almost as quickly as it was cast. Inventory buffers were already thin before China's decision removed a critical supply stream. By mid-January, combined vault inventories across Switzerland's major refineries had reportedly fallen to levels that sound large until placed in context. Global silver demand consumes that amount in a matter of days, not months. At that pace, continuing to export without interruption would have drained domestic stocks almost immediately. Once that metal leaves the country, it cannot be recalled. From a national perspective, that is not a market issue. It is a vulnerability. This is the moment the Swiss government had to reassess its role. Switzerland hosts the world's refining hub, but it also has domestic industries that depend on silver as an essential input. Electronics manufacturing, medical technology, energy systems, and advanced engineering all rely on uninterrupted access to refined metal. Watching inventories collapse while global demand accelerated forced a change in priorities. At some point, the question stopped being how to serve the global market efficiently and became how to avoid being the last country without supply when shortages fully materialized. That shift in framing is critical. Once a government moves from market optimization to risk containment, decisions happen fast. The export freeze was not about maximizing profit or influencing prices. It was about preventing a scenario where domestic industry faced sudden shortages with no recourse. The second crisis was not about supply volumes alone. It was about contracts, obligations, and pressure. European industrial buyers depend on long-term silver agreements signed years ago at prices that now look unreal. These contracts were designed for stability, not scarcity. As physical premiums exploded across Asia and supply tightened globally, Swiss refineries found themselves trapped between market reality and contractual commitments that no longer reflected current conditions. Imagine being obligated to deliver thousands of ounces every month at a fixed price negotiated when silver was far cheaper. Those same ounces could now be sold on the open market for nearly double. The financial gap is not theoretical. It is measured in millions per year for a single contract. Multiply that across dozens of agreements with industrial users, and the losses become severe. For refiners, honoring contracts meant absorbing massive opportunity costs. On the other side of the table were manufacturers, whose factories depend on uninterrupted supply. Solar panel producers, electronics firms, and medical device companies cannot simply pause production for weeks without consequences. When deliveries were delayed or threatened, these companies did not negotiate quietly. They escalated. Phones rang. Letters were sent. Governments were contacted. What began as a commercial issue quickly became a political one. European governments made their position clear. Existing industrial contracts had to be honored. Supply disruptions in critical manufacturing sectors were unacceptable. From their perspective, silver was no longer just a commodity. It was infrastructure. That placed Switzerland in an impossible position. Allow refineries to chase higher prices and risk industrial shutdowns, or enforce contracts and watch refiners bleed financially. There was no elegant compromise. So Switzerland chose the blunt option. Freeze exports. Pause everything. Review every shipment. Prioritize domestic and strategic industrial needs before allowing any discretionary metal to leave the country. This decision did not solve the conflict. It contained it. By stopping the flow, Swiss authorities bought time to manage obligations internally rather than letting the market tear the system apart. The third and most decisive pressure point was strategic, not commercial. Switzerland does not mine silver, not a single ounce. Every gram that enters the country comes from abroad. Switzerland refines, certifies, and redistributes, but it produces nothing at the source. That model works perfectly in stable environments. In unstable ones, it becomes a liability. When external supply is disrupted, a pass-through system suddenly realizes how exposed it truly is. Like any serious country, Switzerland maintains strategic reserves of critical materials: oil, food, medical supplies, and quietly over the past year and a half, silver. Because silver is not just a store of value, it is a critical industrial input. Without it, electronics manufacturing stalls, medical equipment production halts, and energy infrastructure becomes vulnerable. Modern industry does not slow down without silver, it stops. According to industry sources, Swiss authorities and the Swiss National Bank had been building a strategic silver reserve for many months. The warning signs were already visible. Chinese export restrictions were being discussed. Inventory levels on commodity exchanges were declining. Physical premiums were rising. The plan was simple. Accumulate silver while it was still available and relatively affordable before competition intensified. The target for that reserve was substantial. Enough silver to support domestic industry for several months in the event of severe global disruption. Progress had been steady, but incomplete. Then conditions changed abruptly. Prices surged. Supply tightened. What had been a manageable accumulation plan suddenly became dramatically more expensive and harder to execute. At the same time, refinery vault inventories were shrinking fast. The math became uncomfortable. Strategic reserves were not yet sufficient. Refinery stockpiles were vulnerable. Continuing exports under those conditions meant risking a scenario where Switzerland would lose control of both its refining capacity and its domestic supply. From a national security perspective, that risk was unacceptable. The export freeze was the moment Switzerland chose control over exposure. Once the valve closed, the consequences began forming downstream almost immediately, even if they were not yet visible to the public. Bullion dealers across the United States, Europe, and Asia rely heavily on Swiss refined silver, whether directly or through intermediaries. Most operate on lean inventory models, carrying only a few weeks of supply at any given time. Regular shipments replenish stock on a predictable cycle. That cycle was just broken. Bars already sitting in Swiss customs stopped moving. New orders could not ship until export reviews were completed, a process now measured in weeks, not days. For dealers, this created a ticking clock. Inventory on hand could still meet demand for a short time, but once those bars sold, replacement metal would not arrive on schedule. No amount of capital could change that reality. Government and private mints faced a similar problem. Coin blanks used to mint widely recognized investment products traced back to Swiss supply chains. If refined silver cannot leave Switzerland, blank suppliers cannot produce. If blanks do not arrive, mints do not mint. The production of new coins slows, then stops. Recognizable investment grade, silver disappears faster than raw supply alone would suggest. Industrial users felt the pressure even more acutely. Solar manufacturers, electronics firms, medical device producers, and electric vehicle supply chains operate with minimal raw material buffers. When shipments fail to arrive, they face impossible choices: halt production and absorb daily financial losses, or source silver on the open market at prices that destroy margins. Neither option is sustainable. This is how quiet supply disruptions become explosive. Shortages do not announce themselves with headlines. They emerge through missed deliveries, delayed production, and rising premiums. Panic does not start at the consumer level. It starts inside supply chains, among people who understand that once physical flow breaks, restoring it takes far longer than stopping it ever did. At this stage, the market enters what can only be described as the quiet phase. The disruption has already occurred, but awareness is not caught up. Dealers with shipments stuck in customs know, industrial buyers missing deliveries know, refineries know, governments know. The general public does not. Inventory still exists, premiums are elevated but manageable, and most people assume this is just another temporary delay. This phase is deceptive, because it creates the illusion that the system is still functioning normally. Then information begins to leak, slowly and unevenly. A trade publication mentions delayed silver shipments in passing. A dealer updates delivery estimates with vague language about extended fulfillment times. Certain bar sizes quietly disappear from online listings. Financial media largely ignores it because the story does not yet fit a clean headline. To most observers, the market feels tight but not broken. This is when experienced participants start paying attention. As awareness spreads, behavior shifts. Buyers accelerate purchases not out of panic but out of calculation. Premiums rise incrementally. Inventory turnover speeds up. Products that were readily available weeks earlier become harder to source. This is not chaos. It is rationing through price and availability. The system is adjusting internally before the narrative catches up publicly. Eventually, a major outlet picks up the story. Switzerland imposes temporary export controls on silver. Officials use calm language, emphasizing reviews, procedures, and stability. But markets do not respond to reassurance. They respond to constraints. The words export controls and supply disruption trigger a reassessment of risk. Buying accelerates. Dealers who were already thin run out faster than expected. At that point, the question changes. It is no longer about whether silver is expensive, it becomes whether silver is available at all. Delivery timelines stretch from weeks to months. Purchase limits appear. Some dealers stop taking orders entirely, not because demand disappeared, but because supply did. The rupture that began quietly becomes visible, and by then, positioning is no longer possible. Only consequences remain. This is the moment when the distinction between paper pricing and physical reality becomes impossible to ignore. Screens may still show a quoted silver price, but that number loses practical meaning. Futures contracts, exchange-traded products, and derivatives continue trading as abstractions, while physical metal develops its own pricing logic driven purely by scarcity. When delivery becomes uncertain, paper promises stop functioning as substitutes for real supply. In these conditions, premiums are no longer viewed as temporary distortions. They become the true price of access. Paying significantly above quoted levels feels uncomfortable only if you believe the old system still applies. Once supply chains fracture, price is no longer about equilibrium. It becomes a rationing mechanism. Whoever is willing to pay secures material. Whoever hesitates waits, often indefinitely. Attempts to bridge the gap through alternative sources quickly run into hard limits. Smaller refineries outside Switzerland increase output where possible, but refining capacity is not elastic. It cannot be expanded on demand. The infrastructure, expertise, and certification that allowed Switzerland to dominate global refining took decades to build. No other region can replace that capacity in months. As physical availability tightens, trust erodes further. Buyers begin questioning delivery guarantees. Contracts are renegotiated or abandoned. Hedging strategies fail because conversion from paper to metal becomes restricted or impossible. The assumption that futures prices anchor physical markets collapses, reversing their relationship. Physical scarcity now dictates valuation. This is not an emotional shift. It is structural. When a market loses confidence in its ability to deliver the underlying asset, behavior changes permanently. Even if exports eventually resume, participants will remember how quickly access vanished. Diversification away from concentrated hubs accelerates. Investment flows shift. The system adapts, but only after absorbing significant damage. History shows that when a critical commodity faces a sudden supply interruption from a concentrated source, markets do not adjust gently. They reprice violently and then behave differently for years. When China restricted rare earth exports in the early 2000s, prices did not drift upward. They multiplied. Some materials rose tenfold or more, and the shortage persisted far longer than expected. New suppliers eventually emerged, but geology, permitting, and infrastructure do not respond to urgency or political will. A similar pattern unfolded during the oil shocks of the 1970s. Supply from a small group of producers was interrupted, and prices surged almost overnight. Economies stalled, inflation accelerated, and consumption patterns permanently changed. Even after supply normalized, the assumption of cheap and abundant energy never fully returned. The shock rewired behavior. Strategic reserves expanded. Diversification became policy rather than preference. The same dynamic is now unfolding in silver, but with an added complication. Refining capacity, not mining, is the choke point. Even if silver exists in the ground elsewhere, it cannot enter industrial use without specialized processing and certification. Building new refining hubs takes years, not quarters. Training skilled metallurgists, securing regulatory approval, and earning market trust cannot be rushed. This means the adjustment phase will be prolonged. Some refineries will expand, new players will enter, supply chains will slowly reconfigure. But during that transition, availability remains constrained and volatility remains elevated. Markets may stabilize, but they will stabilize at a different baseline than before. Old pricing assumptions will no longer apply. Even if Switzerland eventually relaxes export controls, the damage to confidence is already done. Dealers, mints, and manufacturers will remember how quickly access vanished. Strategic stockpiling will increase. Long-term contracts will be renegotiated. The world will still need Swiss silver, but it will no longer assume that it is always there when needed. So the real question becomes what to do with this information. Not in theory, but in practice. Timing matters more than precision in moments like this. If someone has been considering physical silver and keeps postponing the decision waiting for clarity, the clarity usually arrives after availability disappears. Markets reward early positioning, not perfect foresight. Inventory still exists now, but that condition is temporary by definition. It is also important to reset expectations around premiums. They feel high only when compared to a market structure that no longer exists. In real supply disruptions, premiums are not manipulation. They are rationing. Price expands to allocate scarce material to those who value access most. Waiting for premiums to normalize during a physical shortage often means waiting until product is gone entirely. Availability should take priority over ideal selection. In stable markets, buyers can be selective, compare dealers, wait for discounts, and optimize every purchase. These are not stable markets. If a reputable source has physical metal available, that fact matters more than saving a small amount on price. The best transaction is the one that can actually be completed. Flexibility also becomes critical. When preferred products disappear, alternatives matter. Bars, rounds, coins, different mints, different formats. In a shortage, the distinction between designs fades. Exposure to physical metal is the objective. Form becomes secondary once supply tightens. Finally, patience is required. Delivery times will stretch. That is unavoidable when logistics break. Locking in an order with delayed fulfillment is often safer than waiting for immediate shipping that may never reappear. And for those who already hold physical silver, the most rational action is often inaction. Scarcity does the work without intervention. Everything you just heard traces back to a single quiet decision made while most of the world was asleep. Switzerland did not announce a new era. It did not warn markets or invite debate. It simply acted. At 2:00 in the morning, Swiss time, the flow of refined silver stopped. Not because of panic, not because of speculation, but because national security calculations outweighed global convenience. That moment marked the end of an assumption the market had relied on for decades. This was never about headlines or hype. It was about logistics. Physical systems fail silently. They do not break with explosions. They break with documents, approvals, reviews, and delays. A customs notice can do more damage than a price crash if it blocks material from moving. By the time most people notice something is wrong, the system has already reconfigured itself around scarcity. That is exactly where we are now. The uncomfortable truth is that markets rarely give clean warnings. They shift first, then explain themselves later. The people who truly understand what is happening are not arguing online or waiting for confirmation. They are adjusting quietly. They are securing alternatives, revising contracts, raising prices, and preparing for a reality where access matters more than quotes. Awareness always lags action. That gap is where outcomes are decided. This does not mean panic. It means clarity. Scarcity does not require drama to be real. When refining capacity representing most of the world's supply is effectively removed overnight, fundamentals take over. Opinions become irrelevant, timelines compress, choices narrow. Whether this disruption lasts months or stretches into years, the old assumption of endless availability is already gone. That belief does not come back easily. And that is why this moment matters. Not because of fear, but because of timing. You are hearing about this before it is fully priced in, before it becomes common knowledge, before availability turns into the real constraint. Markets do not ring a bell when they change direction. This time they left a timestamp instead. 2:00 in the morning, Swiss time. That is when the countdown started.